FBI Deputy Director Maya Coleman knew the moment Detective Callahan's fingers wrapped around her throat that she had him exactly where she wanted him. His rage-filled attack in the middle of a federal courthouse would be his undoing, the final piece she needed to expose decades of police corruption. As his grip tightened and spots danced in her vision, she maintained steady eye contact, watching the moment his arrogance transformed into confusion. The courtroom fell silent, except for the judges. Frantic G-strikes, not a single person moved to help their paralysis, a stark reminder of why she'd spent years building this case. Maya could have fought back, could have revealed her FBI credentials instantly, but she needed everyone to witness what she'd known all along. The system that had protected men like Callahan was about to crumble. Here at Shoaib Buzdir Channel, we uncover moments when justice arrives in unexpected ways. This is the account of how one woman's calculated risk exposed a network of corruption and why Detective Callahan's attempt to silence her would become his greatest mistake. Maya straightened her blazer as she entered the federal courthouse, her fingertips brushing against the hidden FBI badge beneath. 20 years of police brutality cases had taught her patience, the art of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Today, she'd finally cornered Detective Ryan Callahan, a man whose personnel file read like a horror novel, the morning light streaming through towering windows did nothing to warm the clinical atmosphere of courtroom 7. Maya felt the weight of countless eyes following her movements, some curious, others hostile. She'd spent months building this case piece by piece, knowing that bringing down Callahan meant more than just removing one corrupt officer. Each step had been calculated, every move designed to expose not just the man, but the entire system that had protected him. "You really think you can touch me?" Callahan had sneered during his deposition, lounging in his chair like a king on his throne. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, sweetheart." His confidence was a weapon he'd wielded for decades, crushing anyone who dared to challenge his authority. Maya had simply smiled, letting his arrogance feed the trap she'd laid. Now, watching him enter the courtroom in his pristine uniform, that same smirk plastered across his face, she knew the performance was about to begin. The air crackled with tension as journalists scribbled in their notepads there, pens scratching like whispers of anticipation. Her opening statement cut through the silence like a blade. "This isn't about one incident, Your Honor. This is about a pattern, a system that has allowed Detective Callahan to operate with impunity for 2 decades. Her voice carried the weight of countless victims who'd been silenced, their stories buried beneath layers of bureaucratic protection. She could feel Callahan's stare burning into her back as she presented evidence: the misplaced body camera footage, the witnesses who'd mysteriously recanted the internal affairs reports that vanished into administrative black holes. With each revelation, his composure cracked slightly, a tightening of his jaw, a flexing of his fingers, the subtle signs of a man watching his kingdom crumble. The courtroom air grew thicker. With each passing hour, Maya methodically unveiled years of corruption, painting a picture so clear that even Callahan's most steadfast supporters began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The judge's expression darkened as the evidence mounted, his own complicity in the system becoming increasingly apparent. The breaking point came when Maya produced a surveillance video showing Callahan meeting with city officials in a darkened parking garage, his chair scraped against the floor as he stood, eyes wide with a fury she'd seen in countless corrupt officers who'd finally realized their power was slipping away. The mask of control he'd worn for so long shattered completely. "You don't belong here," he snarled, closing the distance between them in 3 swift strides. The courtroom collectively held its breath as his hands found her throat. Exactly as Maya had predicted, she didn't struggle, didn't plead. Instead, she maintained eye contact, letting him dig his own grave deeper. With every second that passed in his rage, he'd forgotten the most important rule: never let them see your true face. Security finally intervened, but the damage was done. Callahan's attack had given Maya everything she needed, not just evidence of his violence, but proof of the system's paralysis in the face of abuse. The judge, the attorneys, the gallery, all had frozen, conditioned by years of looking the other way. Their inaction spoke volumes about the depth of corruption she was fighting back. In her office that evening, Maya reviewed the files Darren had uncovered in Callahan's apartment. Names jumped out from the pages: judges, politicians, fellow officers, all connected through a web of favors and buried secrets. Her phone buzzed with a message: "Walk away while you still can." The threat felt hollow now, like the last gasp of a dying regime. "They're scared," Darren observed, his voice tight with concern. "This goes higher than we thought." His loyalty had never wavered. Even when the danger became clear, Maya had chosen her allies carefully, knowing that trust was rarer than justice in their line of work. Maya traced her fingers over the bruises forming on her neck. "Good fear makes people sloppy." She'd learned long ago that corruption thrived in shadows, but fear brought everything into the light. The bruises were a small price to pay for the chaos She was about to unleash the next weeks unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Each piece of evidence Maya released triggered another crack in the Foundation. Officers began turning on each other, desperate to save themselves. Judges recused themselves from cases. Politicians suddenly remembered urgent family matters in distant states. The web of protection that had seemed so impenetrable began to unravel thread by corrupt thread. Maya watched it all from her office, coordinating with FBI teams across the country as similar investigations sparked in other cities. What had started as one case against one corrupt officer had ignited a nationwide reckoning. Her phone rang constantly with tips from other departments. Officers finally ready to speak about the corruption they'd witnessed. Callahan, now stripped of his badge and sitting in a cell, received one visitor. Maya stood before him, noting how his uniform had been replaced by prison orange, how his trademark smirk had dissolved into something hollow. The power he'd wielded so carelessly had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a bitter shell. You still don't get it, do you? He asked, his voice hoarse. You think taking me down changes anything? The system's bigger than both of us. It'll survive long after we're gone. His words carried the desperate conviction of a man trying to cling to his last shred of control. Maya leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. That's where you're wrong. I'm not trying to change the system, Callahan. I'm going to burn it down and build something better from the ashes. Every word was a promise, not just to him, but to every person who'd ever suffered under the weight of corrupt power. She left him there, surrounded by the consequences of his actions, and stepped into the sunlight. Her phone was already ringing with calls from other precincts, other cities where officers like Callahan had operated unchecked for years. This wasn't the end, it was barely the beginning, because Maya Coleman had learned long ago that justice wasn't given, it had to be taken, and she was just getting started. The war against corruption wouldn't be won in a single battle, but she'd finally shown the world that no one was truly untouchable. Maya's victory against Callahan sparked a nationwide awakening as she stood at her office window months later, watching protesters gather outside police headquarters demanding accountability. She reflected on how one moment of calculated risk had ignited a movement. The bruises on her neck had long faded, but their impact remained a reminder that sometimes justice required putting everything on the line. Her phone buzzed with another text from a whistleblower. The fifth this week. Change was happening not because she defeated one corrupt officer, but because she'd shown others they could fight back. The system wasn't invincible, it just needed someone brave enough to throw the first punch. This Shoaib Buzzer Channel series reveals how ordinary people become extraordinary heroes by standing up to injustice. If Maya's journey moved you, help us reach more viewers by hitting subscribe. We're building a community of 10,000 strong who believe in the power of truth. Encourage, share this video to inspire others, because sometimes all it takes is one person's story to give someone else the strength to speak up.